All right, let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to our next webinar in our monthly series at Biolinks Alliance, climate proofing our forests from the ground up. So tonight you'll hear about our Spring Plains Watershed repair project, working towards restoring a highly degraded box ironbark forest. My name is Chris Pockney. I'm an ecologist with Biolinks Alliance. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm presenting from Taungurung Country this evening, and the project that we're talking about is also on Taungurung Country. I extend my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that to all First Nations people in attendance tonight. I'd like to firstly introduce Sarah Smith, our Network Members and Operations Manager, who's moderating for us tonight. And Sarah has already started the recording tonight, so please be conscious of that. Keep your microphones muted and your videos off throughout the presentations, please. We'll have some Q&A time at the end, so as questions pop into your head, please do put them down in the chat, and Sarah will collate those as we go and bring them up at the end. And depending on how we go for timing and how many questions we get, if we don't get through them all, we will keep track of them and get back to you across the next week or so. So we'll get straight into it. So you'll hear tonight from a man who has lived and breathed this project really for the last few years, Cameron O'Mara, who's our Heathcote Local to Landscape project facilitator. But I'll first pass it over to our Executive Director, Dr. Sophie Bickford, to talk about how this project came to be.
Thanks, Chris. Sorry, I thought I was muted there. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And look, a special welcome to those who've made it, who have actually financially contributed to this project over the years and really enabled it to happen, because it's not without the generous donations from many private individuals and some trusts that this project wouldn't have been able to have. Wouldn't have been done without that funding support. So look, the project Spring Plains is a pilot or demonstration project, and what it's doing, it's piloting a number of restoration practices that have shown promise when they've been trialled in different contexts or individually or at smaller scales, but they've never been brought together like this and applied across a whole watershed. And they've been designed to address the critical issues that affect the health, resilience and biodiversity of the box ironbark forest, but also other forest types through central Victoria that were heavily affected by gold mining and other disturbances since European settlement. And the techniques have been designed to give them a chance to better hold water, to sort of fix some of the dysfunction that has occurred from the disturbances in the past due to sort of hydrological relations and soil water holding capacity of these systems, which has then had a run-on effect on their productivity and biodiversity. It's particularly important to sort of think about how we can get these systems to hold and use water better, as we're sort of, fast approaching a rapidly warming and more extreme climate, or we're experiencing it already, of course, but we're expecting even worse. So this is a pilot that's been designed to learn more about how to apply these innovative new practices in the central Victorian context, and to provide the evidence base to support their broader uptake across the region, because that's what we need to do. We need to catalyse the uptake of practices like these through the box ironbark forests across central Victoria to really have the impact on the threatened woodland bird populations and other creatures that rely on them. So it's been over 4 years since this project was first instigated. It was first developed, the vision for it was developed and a detailed plan drawn up for it by our ecologist Paul Foreman. Being carried out on public land and on a nature conservation reserve. Carrying it out involved a very complicated, convoluted approval process, which took over 3 years. We implemented the works, the on-ground works, after all approvals were gained in winter last year. Look, just speaking for the organisation as a whole, this pilot project is doing, we're thrilled with it. It's doing everything we intended it to do and more. We're really encouraged by the early sort of signs of the interventions on the on-ground interventions themselves. But we're also really encouraged by the broad interest there is in it. I'm going to hand over to Cam now. As Chris said, Cam's the project facilitator, but he's actually much more than that, really. He's carried out a lot of the works himself and brought a real passion and dimension, new dimensions to this project that it didn't have in the first plan. So thrilled that we're going to hear directly from Cam about the project now.
Thank you, Sophie. So yeah, I'm really grateful just to have a project like this to work on. If I'm being totally honest, it is a passion project for me, but just the chance to even work on something like this is just so nice, and I just love it. So I've been given the hard task of actually having a time limit to try and explain this project to you guys, which normally I get to walk around the forest for an hour or two and point at things and show you things, but I've tried to condense it as much as I can into half-hour sort of blocks. So we'll see how we go, but let's just get started. So we're going to start with some context. So that bird that you can see there is a swift parrot, which is a common occurrence in Spring Plains. It uses the site for food as they migrate northwards around this time of year, actually. And they travel across from Tasmania and then up the east coast, following the flowering of the eucalypts. So just for sort of to get your head around the site, we have a treatment site to the east, which is where we've done all of our interventions, and that's called Peters Gully. And we have a control site to the west, which is called White's Gully. Now, both of those catchments run north into Mackivor Creek, which runs straight through Heathcote and out into Eppalock. And the reason that we've chosen these two sites is that we can compare everything that happens in one gully to the gully immediately next door and see if there's any changes between the two sites that are different from one another, and then be able to draw some conclusions from that. So the idea is that by treating the whole site as a single catchment, you can actually look at the hydrology of the site and understand the differences in the way that the water is behaving and the soil is behaving and the biology of the biota of the site are behaving as well in response to the interventions that we've done. And it's just south of Heathcote, which you can see on the map there, that sort of crude map. But Heathcote is just out of view, really, on that map. And the Northern Highway, you can see, runs through just there. So these are some historical images of the types of land degradation that's happened since European settlement. So the top left image is hydraulic sluicing, which is a really common thing that happened around the goldfields. And one really good example of it is at the Pink Cliffs Geological Reserve just near Heathcote. And it's quite beautiful because you can see the different horizons of soil, but it really is a legacy of degradation of the land. So they would basically pump high pressure water down to these spots, spray the cliffs with the water, and then all the tailings would be sluiced off to get as much gold out of the soil as they could. It was a really cheap and dirty but highly effective way of extracting gold from an area that was rich in flake and things like that. And there was also, things like this pit mining, which you can see down the bottom here. So this is a mining camp out near Bendigo around 1850s. And then over here is another one, which is around Bendigo somewhere, just showing the sheer level of clearing that was happening during that time period. So yeah, this is kind of more what we're expecting our site to have looked like at one point, with just like most of the trees just completely gone, and then some areas of encampment as well. And then nearby, closer towards Heathcote, there would have been a lot of this hydraulic sluicing happening as well. So I'm going to go through each of the interventions that we have done in order, and sort of explain what the problem is and then what we did to try and resolve it. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is ecological thinning, which is a bit of a dirty word for many people, but I'm going to try and show you that the way that we've done it is really a gold standard way of doing it. So this tree that you can see here is actually a 186 centimetre diameter at breast height grey box, which is just near the site that we've done all of our activities on. Now you can just see from this image, which was taken on our drone, just the sheer size difference of this tree. This is what we call a large old tree. So this tree would be abundant in hollows. You can see the bough that has fallen off this tree is significantly bigger than even some of the larger trees nearby. This tree really does just tower above the rest of the forest. So being 186 centimeters, it's at least 300, probably 400 to 500 years old. And it's just the only remnant large old tree that exists in this entire forest. All the rest of the trees are immature. The mean stem diameter is about 20 centimeters for the forest. So some of the existing problems that we're left with are an extremely closed canopy, very low light infiltration, able to make its way into the ground level. Immature trees that don't have any hollows. There's probably only about 12 natural hollows in the whole treatment area that we're working with, excluding basal hollows, which are a totally other thing, but there's very little arboreal hollows in the site. A lot of coppicing, which is what you can see in these trees just here, which is where a cut stump basically resprouts multiple stems and then grows really dense regrowth from that. There's almost no woody debris on the ground, which you can see in this image. It's quite an extreme case, but there's very little coarse woody debris left on the ground. Depleted soils with almost no ground cover. So you can see there that there's very little ground story vegetation able to exist. And we've got hydrophobic soils. So when water does land on the soil, it beads off when it's dry. And if it's too wet, then it becomes oversaturated and runs off anyway. So we end up with what we like to call leaky landscapes. Extremely dense regrowth. So any eucalyptus trees that do regrow, they're all, because they were all cleared at roughly the same time, you get this single stand of trees that are all roughly the same age coming up, and they're all very, very dense. And like I said, the mean stem diameter is about 20 centimeters. And then you get things like limited flowering and obviously like limited biodiversity as well. So there's the variety of insects that you get are not what they once would have been. So what did we do? And some of the people, I can see some names here that would have helped participate in this. So thank you for your input to this. But we cut down a lot of the trees, which I don't know, sounds counterintuitive at first, but by removing a certain percentage of the basal area, we call it, of the trees, you actually increase the growth rate of the remaining forest. And we did something else with these trees. We didn't remove them. So this is the area that we covered. You can see here that it's fairly extensive, but it's only about 76.7 hectares of a 138 hectare site. So yeah, we removed a certain percentage, and we had certain goals that we were trying to achieve, and I don't think we got quite to the extent that we were hoping for. But yeah, we've learned a lot from it for sure. So this image that you can see on the left is before we did any thinning. This is the same location about 6 months later, after we'd done our first lot of thinning. And then this is a different site called Pilcher's Bridge. This sort of graph just explains the desired outcome that we aren't able to observe just yet. It's only been about 11 months since we started the interventions. And this is the sort of desired outcome of the site long term. You get a lot of diagonal and horizontal boughs and branches. You get a reasonable mid-story of diverse species, and you get various ages of different trees. So you're trying to transition away from this immature forest, this really dense immature forest, that's not functioning to a more functional and heterogeneous forest, which you can see on the right. So yeah, the mean stem diameter, which I was talking about, diameter at breast height, which is the standard measurement for trees. The benchmark for these forests is actually 70 centimeters. So we're quite a ways off, and the stems per hectare was about 1,000 prior to our works, higher in some areas and lower in others. So yeah, one of the crucial things that we did was we left a lot of the logs in contact with the soil, and it has the effect of, you can see here, there's quite a bit of fungal growth happening, and that fungal growth and those decomposing insects and funguses play a really crucial role in bringing that energy in the system through the rest of the food chain. So you can see here we have things like early colonizers, which grow on living wood. We have early secondary colonizers, which are the things you can see on that log, which are those funguses which start the decomposition process, and then the late colonizers, which really grow in the wood after a few years. And throughout most of the forest, we don't see any of this happening at all, because most of the wood that touches the ground just gets taken away for firewood or cleared away for fuel management. So we're trying to bring back some of those species that aren't really able to exist by doing this. So this is right at the top of the reserve. This was an area this is one of the first areas that we thinned. And alongside the Trek guys, we dropped some of the trees across this little shedding zone, which is where water runs through a little water course. And the reason that we did that, as you can see in the image, is that it allows organic material to accumulate upslope where the logs are. So you end up building soil on those areas and creating a bit of a barrier, kind of like a beaver dam does, where you have these micro little barriers that stop the flow of water and actually slow down the flow of water throughout the landscape. Has impacts on erosion, and it has impacts on regenerating soil and all of those kinds of things, and allowing semi-aquatic species or other plant life to have a toehold and actually germinate. So that's the direction of flow going that way. Yeah, log placed perpendicular flow to allow for accumulation of organic material. So the next thing that we did was install gully ponds. Those are one common species. There's the same species, those two. It's a cut moth, which common, don't touch them. They do hurt a lot. So this is sort of the existing, well, this is White's Gully. So this is our control site, but this is the existing state of most of our forests. You get these huge rainfall events in spring, which you can see on the left there. A lot of water just rushing down the landscape, very high energy. Water's just flowing straight off the landscape during a rainfall event. That is just prior to the October floods of, was it 2022? I can't remember. It's all a bit of a blur at this point. But then in summer, just a few months later, the landscape is just completely dehydrated again. They're incapable of retaining water at all. And it's really only a few months apart, and it's quite shocking to see. So what did we do? We tried to transition from what you can see on the left, where water is just escaping from our gullies, to trapping a lot of that water or slowing a lot of that water in the landscape. And we haven't really done it on a large scale. We only put 22 of these ponds in. But with a very small excavator, which has a very minor footprint, and it doesn't really cause a lot of soil disturbance in the process, and using these logs that are sort of bedded deep into the soil, and then horizontal logs are put across, you can create these little ponds. And these ponds were planted out with semi-aquatic species to try and stabilize the banks. And what that does is it creates a more low energy sort of landscape. So as the water trickles through, which I can show you in the next video. As there is a large rainfall event, the water builds up behind these little constructions. And then the water that's leaving the system is at a much lower energy state, less able to cause erosion and, create more damage downstream, but also allowing all of that rainfall to persist longer in the landscape, which is just a huge boon for, all of the vegetation and then all of the wildlife as well. So here's just a 11-day time lapse, which was taken early this year around the time of the January floods of this year. And you can just see that the water, which would have once just completely disappeared from this area, is now being kept for a longer period in the landscape. So it's just another example of sort of the same thing. And it doesn't mean that the water is not escaping from the landscape. You can see there that it is, but it just takes longer for that process to happen. So instead of it just rushing down into McIver Creek, causing all sedimentation and runoff and more flooding, it's persisting longer in the landscape. Okay, so moving on to ripping, which is the other intervention that we did. We did a bunch of baseline soils testing. So we used CDM Smith to do a lot of that stuff, and we're hoping to do more of that sampling as time goes on. So the ripping was done with a Yeaman's plough, which is basically a deep ripper. And what that does is it tries to create the absolute minimal surface disturbance and maximize the subsurface disturbance. So you can see in that image that I'm just going back and forth. This is a very small example. Most of the rip lines were done over several kilometers. This was really just done for the visual impact that it would have, to show you just how the contour ripping was done. And it was done along the contours. So you can see there from this photo that there's we did about 70 kilometers worth of ripping in just this fashion, going up the slope. So you can imagine water, as it travels down the landscape, actually flows into those rip lines and down into the subsoil. So it actually helps to impede the flow of water along the contour. So it's actually perpendicular to the flow of water. And what that means is that it allows water to penetrate deeper into the soil and rehydrate the root systems and the ground water table. So there's the rip lines that we did. We used a GPS to track all of the rip lines across the entire length of the project. And that's the essential result. So you can see on quite a granular level just exactly where the contour lines are, and maybe where some of the bigger things that might have been in the way of the tractor were as well. So another thing that we did was sow directly a bunch of different wallaby grass seeds into the rip lines, because they're actually perfect environments to do this into, and they're all done by hand and mostly by volunteers. And you can see the photo on the left is a sort of a macro image of a germinating red anther wallaby grass. And then in the rip line itself, you can see all of those seedlings that are germinating. They aren't actually weeds. They're all directly sown wallaby grasses of various kinds. So that's what the seed looked like, which was collected locally from private property with the help of volunteers as well. And there's some of the volunteers that came out and helped us alongside Paul, who actually was instrumental in developing this project. So hats off to Paul for all of this. So these guys are phascogales. I just thought I'd share with you some of the preliminary results. We really don't have, it's too early to talk about results from the interventions that we've done, but we do have results from a lot of the things that we've been monitoring. And we've been doing a lot of monitoring, and big thanks to Chris who's been really instrumental in expanding and deepening the monitoring program that we've put together, which has been really good so far. So before we did any of our interventions, we installed 200 nest boxes across both catchments, roughly equal amounts in each catchment. And we did this so that we could try and understand the way that small arboreal mammals behave in the landscape. And so far, we've got some really interesting results. And I don't know if you want to jump in, Chris, and have a quick word about any of these.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first thing that really blew us away was how quickly these Crefts gliders moved in. That was we did our first survey in November, so that was about 3 months post installation of the boxes, and there were already over 200 Crefts gliders using the boxes. So that, as a starting point, that just blew us away. And then they kept increasing from there basically. But so from the January 23 date onwards, you can see the actual occupancy rate has stayed pretty steady. So they're not necessarily moving into new boxes from that point, and that's pretty much because the boxes are pretty well full. But their numbers kind of kept going up until we can see over the last summer time period that little drop off, and that's probably just a side effect, I guess, of their breeding cycle and things like that. So that September 23 period where we had over 600 gliders, that time of year is kind of peak breeding time for these guys. So we were recording lots of young gliders using the boxes. And then by March, those young have dispersed and the numbers at the site kind of normalize a little bit. So with the boxes we've got, it looks like we're possibly sort of reaching, a bit of a carrying capacity for the site with the Crefts gliders. But considering the lack of natural hollows at the site, we were pretty blown away by how quickly they moved in. And I think got the heat map next that gives us a little bit of a hint as to what's going on there. So basically, as time goes on, the gliders have kind of seemingly moved in from mainly around the northwest corner. It's kicking ourselves a little bit. We didn't start this monitoring sooner after installing the boxes to actually get a really clearer picture. But that seems to be the trend coming in from the northwest, where we've got properties bordering the reserve and nest boxes right near the boundaries. And these properties have got some big, large hollow-bearing trees. So it seems like in 2022, coincidentally, the boxes were also installed kind of at the start of that peak breeding time for the gliders. So I think the gliders were probably present on these private properties in some of these large trees, and we've kind of provided a whole heap of real estate for that year's young to disperse into, basically. So that's been a really cool outcome so far. And then the brush-tailed phascogales use the nest boxes as well. It's probably a less clear pattern with them, but the occupancy rate is tending upwards, which is, that's pretty much what we expect. They're a little bit slower to respond to the boxes than what the gliders were. Potentially a little bit less adventurous, but also they just naturally occur in lower densities than the gliders, so they're kind of naturally going to take a bit longer to move into an area because they're not occurring in such high numbers at a short time. But yeah, really, really promising to see that occupancy rate kind of trending up. And I guess the heat map for phascogales kind of lines up with the fact that they've got big home ranges and lower densities, so there's not as much of a pattern as to where they're actually colonizing first, because the home ranges for these guys are big enough that and they'll use multiple hollows within their range. So if they're in an area, they could kind of pop up anywhere at this site at this sort of size.
Yeah, it's good stuff, isn't it? So it's interesting to me to think about it tells the story of why certain species are at risk. And we know that crest gliders really aren't a threatened species at all. If anything, they're thriving in the current condition that we've sort of created for them. But things like phascogales, these are the species that we're focused on. We're collecting data on crest gliders because it's just, an obvious thing to do. But the thing that we're really focused on is understanding why phascogales behave the way that they do. And it's just part of their life cycle and part of their breeding cycle that we're telling the story of through this data, which is really interesting, and love to keep collecting this data because it's a pretty good data set with only 4 or 5 data points. So if we could keep this going well into the future, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah, it's probably, sorry, just quickly, that's the other thing that I should have mentioned is that the phascogales in particular, we really do need just a whole lot more data to actually see any trends because they're, I guess for those of you who don't know, the males pretty much all die off after breeding. So they have these massive fluctuations in their populations naturally. And so to actually be confident about any trends, they're a species that we really need to kind of watch over the long term.
Yeah, it's what Chris is talking about. You can actually kind of see in this data here where you've got this huge spike in phascogale nests in this period, but a massive drop off in the actual number of phascogales that we're observing in that time period. And that aligns like perfectly with the die-off of male phascogales, which happens around that time. So the data is really showing us things that we already know about phascogales, but we're learning a lot about how they behave in this landscape in particular. So moving on to kangaroo exclosures. So these 2 images that you can see here are a control site where we haven't put in any exclosure. So an exclosure is an area of fencing that keeps herbivores out. And we do that to see how the vegetation responds without herbivores present. So you can see here, the image on the left is the control from roughly 18 months ago, maybe a little bit more. I couldn't exactly remember when. I've got the date written down somewhere, but around there somewhere, we installed these exclosures. And these images are the exact same spot. So the left image and the right image, same spot. The image on the right was taken at the end of summer this year. And the image on the left was taken quite a ways back. And you can see there's a lot of bare ground. There's not much vegetation cover. There's a little bit of moss. There's a little bit of, you can see some graminoids and other things growing there. And then in summer this year, you can see a little bit of, Cassinia growth and some other things growing there as well, but not much. There's not much going on there. So now looking at the exclosures, these are right next to that other site. So you can see the image on the left. So that's 18 months ago when we first installed the exclosure. And you can see it's very similar to that control site that we had, where there's very little vegetation. There's a little bit of moss, maybe a little bit of Cassinia and some other things as well, but there's really not that much vegetation. And compare that to now. So that's a huge difference, in my opinion, in just the sheer volume of vegetation cover. You can see all of these inflorescences are actually red anther wallaby grass, and I can't see a single red anther wallaby grass in this entire plot previously. And you can see it's definitely the same spot. That acacia's there, that stick, you can barely see it now. I mean, it's the exact same stick that's still there. The difference that excluding grazing animals has had on the site is massive, and that bears out in the data that we've been collecting as well. So this is our exclosure data table that we've so far put together. We've only measured it 3 times, and you can see that this is the exclosure area on the left. So this row was this column, sorry, was our first sampling. So we saw quite a low level of vegetation, and then slightly higher in the next sampling, and then again even higher this year. So this row here, the green indicates a higher percentage out of 100, and the red indicates a lower percentage. And the control, which is incredibly important to do, because if we'd just done the exclosure, we would have seen an uptick regardless. But because we've had such a lush few years, we are seeing a spike in vegetation growth anyway, even in the control sites. But the fact that we have a control and an exclosure means we can tease all of those out. And the area shown circled in or squared in red is the sites that I've just shown to you there. So you can see the percentage change from 11% cover to 75.3% cover. And in the same zone, we've gone from 10% to 24% in the control. So we're talking about fairly large increases, and that's probably the most extreme example, that site there. But you can see across the board, it's quite a strong signal that we're getting from these exclosures. And what that really tells us is that I don't know why that's done that. Sorry. That the exclosures really are having a massive impact on the growth rate of these plants, of the ground story, and that we think that that's happening across the entire site. And basically, we've created the ideal environment for kangaroos with our land practices. So creating these grazing zones that are just ideal for these herbivores to move through at night time and eat as much as they'd like. And then they move into the forest during the day where it's cooler and they've still got plenty of browsing and grazing to do during the day. So I just thought I'd show you as well some photo point monitoring that we've been doing. So this site that you can see here is before thinning, and it's about to transition. So this was just immediately after the thinning. You can see quite a lot of fuel that's been dropped. Now this is in summer of this year, 7 months after the treatment. And this is today. I actually took this photo today out on site. So yeah, I'll just play it again really quickly, just so you can get a sense of how much the forest has changed in these areas that we've thinned. And this is just one fairly rudimentary monitoring regime that we're doing to just visually monitor the change in the site over time. Yeah, so the vegetation growth is clearly higher. Okay, so far we have, through iNaturalist and through some of our amazing volunteers, managed to identify 689 species. So those are confirmed identifications of species through the iNaturalist platform. We also use Digivol and a bunch of other things, and a lot of the time, mostly through John Walter. We spend a lot of time with John, and John helps us identify a lot of these species. But these all of the photos that you can see here were taken at Spring Plains, and they were all records from either light sheets or just you know, as you're moving around the site, just recording whatever you find. So I know we've spoken a lot about the larger fauna and the arboreal mammals and things, but I just wanted everyone to think about the fact that, you know, most of the species that we have, most of the biodiversity that we have are insects and plants and arachnids, and, you know, all of the sort of the more charismatic things are make up a much smaller proportion of the overall biodiversity of the site. And all of these various invertebrates play a huge role in the function of the ecosystem that really can't be overstated. And I've also thrown in some orchids and some funguses and stuff in there to make the point really clear as well. So as far as volunteering on the project has gone, we've had 64 on-ground volunteers. It all sort of started with the Volunteer Innovation Fund, which was a chunk of money given to us by Parks Victoria. We've had 522 online volunteers with a total of 586 volunteers. Equates to about 598.5 hours of on-ground time. And online hours is about 573, and the total hours is about 1,176. So yeah, quite a significant contribution from many volunteers, most of which is just, again, John Malta, but I don't know if he's here. He can probably. So broader context. So I thought it'd be good to sort of broaden out the scope, because this project is really just a pilot project that's designed to demonstrate how this can be done across the entire landscape. And what we're looking at in just the box ironbark is a huge area, and it's vast. It stretches all the way from Stowell near the Grampians up to Chiltern. It's just a huge land mass that we're looking at, and lots of existing national parks and state parks and conservation reserves and all of those things. But as far as we can tell, I don't think anyone's had to go through the same sort of rigorous process to do this kind of work on these state-owned lands, to break down those barriers of getting approvals and things like that. So this project really is an example of how to do that as well. So what we're looking at in just the Goldfields region, this image really shows the context of just how much of the land that we're looking at is actually private bush as well. So you can see that actually a larger proportion of the available box ironbark is actually on private land. So, if we spend a lot of time at Biolinks motivating landholders to take these activities up themselves, and we've managed to convince quite a few people just to do it off their own back. But it's something that anyone can do on their land, and it's actually a much simpler process to do on private property than it is to do on public property. You can leave the public land to us. We're pushing governments and things to try and change their ways and take these practices up, and they're starting to listen. So hopefully we can get some movement happening there in the future. But you can see that the area in red down in that corner that's Peter's Gully. That's what we've managed to do. And when you look at it in the broader context, there's a lot we need to do, and we really need everyone to get on board and start trying. Even if we don't have all of the results yet, we certainly know that some of the interventions, we know exactly what's going to happen based on other studies that have been done by Parks Victoria and things. So yeah, there's plenty that we can get cracking on now, and we definitely don't have time to sit around and wait. So what's next for the project? So there's a few things. The first thing is knowledge sharing. So we're really trying at Biolinks to push this out to as many industry professionals as possible. So we're actually considering running industry professional workshops where people can come along and see what we've done, and try and convince people that having a biodiversity-centered approach to ecological thinning is really the way to do it. It's the best way to restore the ecological function of the site. And we believe that even if there is some kind of extraction happening or something like that, that it can be done in a way that is beneficial to the biodiversity if it's done properly. And yeah, one of the things we want to make sure that that's being done properly. So citizen science events, we have lots of citizen science things up on the website. Most of them happen from spring to autumn, but we do have a few things running over winter as well. Animals don't move around as much in winter, like me, kind of. Media productions and storytelling. We have a lot of footage that we want to put together into the storytelling process and make it into something that we can put out into the world and convince more people. And then partnering anyone who wants to partner with us to develop a project. Please feel free to reach out, because we want to be a part of all of this stuff as well. The second thing is expanding the interventions. So just building on the stuff that we've already done at Spring Plains. So rewilding the understory. There's a lot of missing species that we know would have once been there, or there are a lot of species that just aren't in as high abundance as they would have once been. and those species play a really, really key role in the function of the overall ecosystem. We're missing a lot of those flowering mid-story species. We're missing a lot of those threatened orchids and other threatened ground flora species. And we also want to create more ponds throughout the site as well. The flooding that happened in January was pretty poorly timed, as the plants that we planted weren't really established yet. So a couple of the ponds got completely covered in sedimentation. So we have a working bee that's coming up to try and remedy that as well. But we think putting more ponds in would be a good idea. So infilling and sort of putting more of those ponds throughout the watercourse is one of the other things. And then continuing and expanding the monitoring. So currently we're looking at 13 indicators, which we plan to measure over the next 10 years. So you've seen a couple of those that we've been measuring, and they're really just at the nascent sort of stage. We want to see this data be drawn out. I mean, you can think about that FASCA Gale data that we've got. Imagine that being drawn out over 10 years and actually having really granular understanding of how these populations are behaving in the landscape. When you have an event like thinning happening, it's really, really crucial to be able to convince people to undertake forest management that is focused on biodiversity. To have those indicators is absolutely crucial. And then we also want to try and develop partnerships to monitor things like hydrology or other things like remote sensing techniques, and all of those sort of higher level techniques that are being implemented by universities and things like that. We want to be able to partner by leveraging all of the monitoring that we're currently doing to do more. And I can see that I'm running out of time. So a couple of things we've got here. So there's a QR code there on the left, which is to become a volunteer citizen scientist. And then on the right, we've got donations for the future, to support the future of the project as well. So if you're interested in either of those things, both of them can be found on our website. But those are some direct links if you want to pull your phone out really quickly and just scan those. But yeah, just to let you know, you can really help with this project, and we definitely need it at the moment. We've been supported quite heavily by the Ross Trust for the last 3 years, but we definitely need ongoing support to be able to continue this project and convince as many people as possible that it's worthwhile. So yeah, just a big thank you to everyone that's mentioned here. I don't know if you want to jump in, Sophie, and mention anything about our supporters.
Just to reiterate what you've said, just how important they've been to developing this project, and I think a lot of government people have looked at us in amazement that we've actually managed to pull this off. And to me, it's been a collaboration between people who are, understand that more needs to be done, are prepared to back something that's new and a bit innovative and risky, and just worked out how to push through the complicated systems and approval processes and just get it done. And we need more of this sort of stepping out of the box and just giving things a go in a thoughtful and in a thoughtful and coordinated manner. But it's really encouraging that getting the right people together, you can really achieve great things, even if they seem a little foreboding at the start. And how the hell are we going to do this? Well, we've done this over the last 2 years, and we're and as I said, it really has been because of the people who've believed in this and funded us, and this great team we've got that pulled together to deliver it.
Awesome. So last thing is, if anyone would like to reach out, please, then my email address is there. If you want to talk about what we've done, please let us know. Or if you've got a project or whatever, if you're thinking about developing a project, then please reach out. But I think I'll throw it over to Sarah I'm sure there's lots of questions in the chat. And just to mention as well, all the images that were taken that weren't credited on the slides were taken by Brendan Sides, Chris Pockney, myself, and John Walter, who's our Gold Star volunteer.
Sorry, just unmuting myself there.
You're right.
Thanks so much. We definitely have quite a few questions here. So I'll just start here. Carl asks, did you poison the stumps of the trees that you thinned to stop coppicing?
Yes, we did. And it's what we've found is that it's crucial that you do poison the stumps. Now we used fairly localized. We actually used a few different methods. I know Trek had cutting and painting, where they were using foam rollers and things to paint the stumps. And some of the other contractors, we used 3 different contractors, and they all kind of used similar, various different techniques. But yeah, the best method that we found was the use of a mix of Garlon and Roundup. And I know that that's, really bad, but the amounts that you're applying are actually fairly low, and you only have to apply them on the cambium. So you don't have to apply them across the entire stump. But if you don't do that, you get almost 100% coppicing, and it's kind of the problem that's got us into this mess in the first place. And we've seen very little impacts on soil and off-target effects. When you're using a backpack sprayer, that's a whole other thing, and we're not even thinking about doing anything like that. But yeah, very localized herbicides, I'd say, is pretty crucial to the results that you want to get for this kind of work.
Colin asks, how do you work out how many trees to remove? Is the target stem, hectare, or canopy cover?
It's not canopy cover, it's basal area. So we were actually limited to the size of the tree that we could remove by a self-imposed thing. And also Parks Victoria were very hesitant about risk, which is understandable, but we were limited to trees less than 30 centimeters diameter at breast height. And I'd say if you removed all the trees that were 20 centimeters diameter at breast height, you still wouldn't get a 50% reduction in basal area across the entire site. Like there's that many trees that are below that. I mean, the average is 20 centimeters. So yeah, you'd get roughly around a 50% reduction if you just removed all of the trees that were 20 centimeters and below. So yeah, basically in every area of the site, there were trees that were bigger than that. You don't even go near them. And by doing that, you end up with this structure that is just mostly mature trees with a fewer, more immature trees. So yeah, you get away with it by just targeting the trees that are below a certain diameter at breast height, and by not doing it across the entire site, by being patchy in the way that you do it. And a lot of that's born out of the research that Parks Victoria did about 20 years ago when they did their thinning trials.
Colin asks, how did you work out? Oh, no, sorry. Carl asks, how did you determine the number of gliders and chewins using the nest boxes? Did you lift the lid and film them?
So we use a pole camera. We've got 2 different pole cameras. One's developed by Arbicam, and it's basically just a PVC pipe that is on a long painter's pole, and it sends a signal straight to your phone. So one of us holds the camera, the other person holds the phone, and you stick the camera in, and it goes straight in through the same hole that the gliders use. So you don't have to lift the lid at all. And then you count the number that you can see. So we know that we're undercounting. So the numbers that you saw are actually less than the actual number, but you only count the number that you can see, that you can confirm. And then you write that number down. And yeah, the most that we had in one box, and I thought this was crazy, to even make the thing go up to 10. I thought it was nuts to put the selection box to go all the way to 10. I'm like, oh, there's no way we're going to get 10 in a box. And then that next day we got 13 in a box that we could confirm, which is just crazy. The number of gliders is just off the charts.
John asks, where would you recommend a private landowner, a trust for nature property, for example, go to obtain bespoke advice on how to improve the forests on their property?
Depends on where you live, but if you want to talk about it, and my email address is right at the top there. But yeah, if you can find any local land care group, that's a good start. Or yeah, any sort of local not-for-profit conservation group, that's also a good place to start.
But people could come to
Biolinks
us
Alliance.
and
Sorry, Sarah.
we could definitely give them some advice as well.
Yes, yeah. Like I said, my email's right there if you want to reach out.
Dale asks, was it only kangaroos that were targeted to exclude?
No, so we actually had on 1/3 of the exclosures, we had chicken wire, which excluded rabbits and hares as well. And we saw almost no difference between the ones that had rabbit and hare exclusion as well as kangaroo exclusion. So yeah.
Declan asks, in which order were the thinning, digging and ripping works undertaken? And is there a preferred time to thin with regards to tree growth, flowering, species migration, etc.?
So with regards to, I'll take your question in reverse order, but with regards to those things, I don't know. My assumption is that it's best to do it at the beginning of winter, for those reasons. I don't think it'll have a big effect on those things regardless, but I think that probably is the best time to do it. But it's also the best time to do it at the beginning of winter because you've got more of a lead-in time to summer. And that lead-in time to summer is the concerning period where there's still lots of foliage on the trees and people have, worries about fuel loads and things like that. So that the more lead-in time you have to the next fire season, the better.
And what about the digging and ripping works?
So they were all done. So you have to do the ripping before you do the thinning, for obvious reasons. You can't be driving a tractor around with a bunch of logs on the ground. So we started the thinning first at the top of the reserve and then moved our way down the reserve because we couldn't rip the top part of the reserve. So the ripping was just a little bit more complicated technically in terms of equipment and things like that. So that took a little bit more thinking about to get done. So we started the ripping at the top, and then the ponding and the ripping and the thinning at one time were all happening at the exact same time. So I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks worth of ripping that was done in the end. And yeah, most of the thinning went up until September. So it started in around May and then went through to September. So yeah, quite a longer window that it takes to do the thinning than the other activities. The ponding only took a week.
We're just about run out of time. It's 7 o'clock, but I think we could do one more question. We do have a few questions and we can get back to people who ask those questions and send them out to everybody if they're interested. Lindy asks, what are the opportunities for areas that are not classified as box ironbark? So for example, what about stringy bark dominant areas that may be adjacent to or approximate to those ironbark forests?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends on what the state of each forest is. And I've worked in plenty of forests. I used to work on the Mornington Peninsula, and I know of lots of forests that are suffering from very similar conditions that these forests are. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these interventions only apply to box ironbark forests, especially things like grassy woodland, which have been cleared. So almost any forest that's been cleared and is now regrowth is immature and is probably overstocked and, to use silvicultural terminology, overstocked. Yeah, a lot of these forests are suffering from the same things. So it does require sort of an assessment to figure out whether or not these interventions would work. But yeah, it's definitely fairly easy to, as long as you have the right expertise to figure out whether they can be applied.
think we might finish up there because it's 7 o'clock now. And
Yeah, I can see some more great questions.
yeah,
in
there's
the
a couple
chat,
of
so
more
we'll get back to
questions.
everyone.
Yeah, we will answer those questions and send them to everybody with the recording. We do have a short survey that we'd really appreciate everybody to fill in. I'm just going to put that in the chat now. If you don't mind filling that in, we'd really appreciate your feedback. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. And like we said, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. So please jump on and do the survey. We'd really appreciate it. And thank you so much for coming tonight.